I will do my best to monitor 2 screens of people tonight. So we're going to start off our program with the advertised program, where we're going to have Fabio and Captain Adams and Jolene here to help guide us in our discussion about hate and bias graffiti and that kind of crime in our neighborhood, and how we can move forward to create a greater feeling of security and social justice in our neighborhood, and bring our actions in line with our rhetoric about our own inclusivity and diversity statement that we've adopted as an organization. So our hopes coming out of this meeting are that we have sort of a nexus of people who are ready to carry that forward through our community organization. And that was part of the reason to invite Jolene, because the River Road Community Organization, or ARCO as they call themselves, started a social justice committee this year that's been active already. So I guess we'll start with Fabio, and then go to Captain Adams, and then to Jolene, and then we'll move to question and answer. So take it away, Fabio. You're mute, Fabio.
Doesn't matter how many times we do it, every day. Thank you. I will start with a short presentation. It explains the program we offer at the City of Eugene, our Rights Assistance Program. And then Captain Adams will talk about how EPG works as part of this program and supporting our community. And then after Jolene talks about experience in River Road, we can answer questions. So everything that we do at the Office of Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement is guided by some statements that our City Council has passed. One of them is a statement to create a community that is safe and welcoming for everyone. So we have a training program that some of you have attended called Belonging. And we go with this image and an idea that everyone should belong here if people want to come, live, work, and visit our city. Our Rights Assistance Program is a pioneer in this country. We were one of the first cities to have such a program. And it started out of volunteers, out of community members who decided to get together and do something. So they did it through the Human Rights Commission. And people volunteering to that commission started checking what was going on in the community, right? Identifying hate crimes, identifying discrimination, and pushing the city to move forward with some policies and some programs to support people who were being victimized. That program that started with volunteers from the community is now run by city staff. We still have the Human Rights Commission advising us and provide information that guides our program and guides how we interact with the community. This chart explains the program we have in place, and we won't go explaining every piece of it, but just to give you a general idea of how we operate. So our program has 3 main phases. The first phase is the reporting, and that reporting can come from different sources. So people and organizations can contact either HRNI or Eugene Police and let us know of a hate crime. If it's a crime and if it's an emergency, we tell people to first contact police. If it's something that already happened and people want to just let us know, and they can contact HRNI directly. Sometimes it is a crime, but people do not want to contact police for different reasons. So they contact HRNI and we work with them. And sometimes we get people to feel comfortable reporting. Sometimes they do not want to file a report. They just want to be heard and they want us to know what is going on. So we have different channels for people to report and let us know what's going on in the community. We compile all the information we get from the crimes reported and investigated by Eugene Police and the discrimination cases or the criminal cases that people do not wish to report to police. And we prepare an annual report. So that's our tracking phase. That annual report, we usually have an event in which we release the findings of the report and we talk about what the city and our community partners are doing to support victims, to raise awareness about the issue, and to prevent more cases from happening. That annual report is available in our website, and later on I will present some of the data, a snapshot of what we had in the latest report. So when people contact Eugene Police or HRNI, and they have been a victim of a hate crime or discrimination, we try to work with each victim to provide the service they need, and that's victim-centered. Some people, they just want to report, they do not want or they do not need extra services, or they do not feel comfortable receiving extra services. So we just end that process with the reporting. But many people do need support, they need referrals, they need someone to talk to, so they can come to us. And some cases we solve through City of Eugene departments. Some situations, if it's a criminal situation, that can be referred to the city prosecutor, and then that can result in a court proceeding. Sometimes we just contact local agencies and we connect people with available resources here in our community. For some situations, such as discrimination in housing, discrimination in employment, or people being discriminated in a place of public accommodation, then we have to refer to the Bureau of Labor and Industries for an investigation, or sometimes to the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. And they can do investigation, and they can take on the case from us and work with the victims. But everything that we do in our office and the referrals that we provide, they are all victim-centered. We always have to work with the victim and see what they feel comfortable accessing, what they feel comfortable talking about, and so on. For the criminal cases, besides having our own reporting, Eugene Police also reports to the FBI. And every year when that report comes out, we get a lot of media inquiries because people see Eugene as this place that has a lot of hate crimes. Usually more than half of all the hate crimes reported in Oregon comes from Eugene. That doesn't mean we have the most hateful community in the state, but that we were basically the only city reporting at this level. So since the reporting was voluntary, almost no one was doing it. So for the city of Eugene, it was important for us to know what is going on in the community, to use this as an education tool and to support the victims. Now the state of Oregon has a different law. It went into effect last year. And now all law enforcement agencies in Oregon have to report hate crimes and bias incidents. So we are expecting that this work will become more common throughout the state. Here are some of the data we had from the latest report, which is the report for 2019. We are right now reviewing the cases for the past year, so that report should be coming sometime around May. So last year, our data shows 48 hate crimes, very much in line with what has been happening every year, except for 2017, when we had a sharp increase in the number of cases. The types of cases that are reported as hate crimes are mostly cases of vandalism, and those include hate graffiti, physical assault, and intimidation. Those are the most common types of cases that are the motivation for hate crimes. Here you can see the protected classes that were involved in each of the hate crimes reported to Eugene Police in 2019. So when we have race and ethnicity combined, that's the absolute majority of the cases. So Eugene is a community that is mostly white, so our people of color here is a small percentage of the community, and yet that is the main reason for people being targeted in hate crimes. So we have a large number of people of color, mostly Black and African Americans being victimized. The cases involving religion are usually cases of swastika graffiti. When they come in isolation, they are classified as anti-Jewish. In this slide, you can see the data over the years for each protected class. Again, you can see that in every year, race and ethnicity are the main ones. Religion appears with a considerably higher number, and those are usually cases of swastika graffiti. In this slide, you can see the breakout by race and ethnicity. And here we have, as I mentioned, Blacks and African Americans receiving, being the victims in most of the cases, and they represent only 2% of our population, less than 2% of our population. And overall, they are the victims in 35% of all cases reported to Eugene Police and to our office. In this slide, you can see the cases for the non-criminal activity, the case of discrimination. And these involve cases of discrimination in employment, place of public accommodation, and housing. Housing represents most of the calls we receive in our office. Some of the cases are, when we talk to people and we understand what it is not a case of discrimination, but just it's related to the difficulty people have these days accessing housing. So we do support those people when they call us, but we do not include those cases in our reporting. Here, we only have the cases that have been based on a protected class status, the clear case of discrimination. Luckily, the non-criminal incidents have been declining in the last 3 years, and we are expecting a similar number for 2020. This slide shows the breakdown by race and ethnicity for the non-criminal incidents. The numbers are smaller, but again, you can see that Blacks and African Americans are the group most targeted as well. This chart, this picture just shows where the cases are happening. We do not report the exact locations, and that's to protect the victims. We just report this shaded map. You can see that most of the cases are reported in the downtown, Jefferson West Side, and Whitaker neighborhoods. And we have some cases connected to the high schools. Since the numbers are small, it's difficult to separate by neighborhood. But just by the location of the high schools and the shaded areas, you can see that Santa Clara and River Road, they do have a concentration there, mostly connected to the high school as well. Finally, I just want to share with you the ways in which people can contact us. So we have our office number. People can call and leave a message. We can talk to people in English and Spanish. When we were open, they could walk into our office. Now the office has been closed for a year, and we have moved. We will be at the LCC building downtown. So we will update that when we are open again. But people can call our office, or they can just go online, eugene-or.gov, report hate, and they can file a complaint over there. If it's a criminal incident and it's an urgent case, we tell people to call 911. There is more to the program, and after Captain Adams presents his portion of this presentation, we can talk about how HRNI and Eugene Police collaborate to support the victims and to educate the community around hate and bias incidents.
Thank you, Fabio. Take it away, Captain Adams.
Well, thank you, Fabio, great work. I don't have a nice PowerPoint presentation, but I do want to talk about just a little bit of an overview of how the Salem Police Department handles our bias criminal or bias incidents. Criminal or non-criminal incidents. So first of all, I think it's important for all of you to recognize and understand that what we've seen, particularly recently in the Santa Clara neighborhood, is absolutely horrific, and it's unconscionable. There's really no words as a police officer I can say other than it makes me angry. I've been doing this in Oregon for 26 years to fight exactly what we're seeing, and that's hurtful to me. And I understand that as a white man, and there's no way I can fully ever understand how hurtful it is to our minority communities. And so really from our agency, we really want your police department, we really want you to know that we understand the impact this has in our community as a whole and to everybody. And it is very, very important to us. And our latest press release that we put on the last one We could have done a little bit better with that, and that left more questions, I think, than answered, which is, in part where I really wanted to be here tonight to talk about exactly what we do with these cases. So just to jump at it, every single incident that comes in where we have a nexus to some type of a hate speech or hate event, it is investigated by the police department as a bias crime. We take every single one of these and we investigate them initially as bias crimes. And that's an important delineation because most of the time the inference is if we do not arrest for a bias crime in the end, that we didn't approach it from that angle, and that is not the case. Every single one of these is investigated as a bias crime. Generally speaking, your patrol officers will be the original responders. Every single one of those cases comes to an investigative unit that's assigned in my division and in the investigations division, and that's our special investigations unit. There's 5 detectives in there and an analyst that their primary duties are to investigate bias and hate related incidents. And that's a pretty big deal for an agency our size to have a dedicated team of investigators to do this. And on top of that, they're also our liaisons to our represented groups through HRNI and to make sure that we have some liaisons to our underrepresented groups through our detectives. So our detectives will go out and do what they do, and they'll determine whether or not there is at the end of the investigation if we have a bias crime or not. Quite often we get into, and we found this in the last incident, in Senate Bill 577 made some delineations for us, and that was, Fabio alluded to that. That was in the 2018 legislative session and went into effect in 2019. And it took the old crime of intimidation and renamed it to bias crime. And don't quote me on this, but I believe it's Oregon Revised Statutes 166.155. And what our investigators will do, we'll look at what is the motivation of the suspect, which is what that's our legal burden in criminal cases for bias crime, is that the suspect did either the criminal mischief or the assault based on their perception of the other individual's classification or represented group. And sometimes, we just can't meet that legal burden, which is what we saw in the last case with the graffiti that was to the church in the business complex. And I'll tell you that hurts. I mean, we know there's hate speech out there, and it's wrong. It's wrong. But the legal burden does require us to prove that it was placed there by whoever the suspect would be, with the intent or with the perception of the class or representation of the person who they're assaulting or applying the graffiti to. So once we get to that point, those detectives will do the investigations, and they'll take them through and work them all the way to the end. And then we'll engage along the way with HRNI. And also, as Fabio pointed out, we do all our reporting, not only internally, but we do report to the FBI and federal authorities even before Senate Bill 577 was created, which had that requirement. So that's a real fast overview of how we do the investigations and having a special unit that actually does engage in these. I think at this point, I'm going to hold off on anything further because I'm going to guess there's about 1 billion questions we'll have coming down range over things.
I just want to add a little bit about what happens after. So when we have these investigations, for example, when a case is reported to EPG, the officers usually provide the victims with information for our office. And then they can contact us if they need additional support. For the reporting, we'll have these meetings with EPG in which we review each case and we discuss the classification of the case. Sometimes we do have disagreements about how case should be classified, what was the motivation, and we go through a review process. There are cases that sometimes they look criminal in nature, but for some reason we cannot include in the criminal report, so they go into the bias incidents. and vice versa. Sometimes we have cases that were not thought to be criminal in nature, and after these reviews, they can change. So sometimes when people look at our reports, it is possible that if you go back, you'll find different numbers. Because when we do the annual report, some cases are still open or pending. And sometimes we do get more information, we have to reclassify those cases. So the numbers are sometimes not exact on that presentation. We also, as Captain Adam mentioned, we have this partnership with the liaisons. There are detectives from EPG that have been assigned to different communities, and our office has staff that partners with them in connecting with those communities. Unfortunately, that program started a few months before the pandemic, and since the pandemic hit, we could not make those visits. So it has been in waiting until we can go back to that job of visiting people and establishing those relationships. And for the communications, we do have also an agreement to collaborate on how we communicate, how the language we use in reporting the results of cases that have an impact in the community.
Yeah, and just to jump in behind that, Fabio, and just to delineate a little bit between a bias crime and a bias incident, which that's also going back to the etymology of that is Senate Bill 577, which created what is now a bias incident. Prior to Senate Bill 577 coming into place, there was no documentation of a bias incident, and a bias incident would be protected speech. And you know, somebody yells a racial slur at somebody on the street, offensive, yes, hate speech, yes, but unfortunately protected via the First Amendment. And the state recognized we need to track this because these could be flags for us of behavior that we need to be monitoring, first of all, or secondly, when you start to see more of these things occurring, then that may garner a little more attention from law enforcement. So we also track bias incidents as well as bias crime. And Fabio and his team do a great job at tracking those and creating the report that ultimately goes to Department of Justice, I believe, is the record keeper of that. And so that's the delineation between a bias crime and a bias incident.
And here is perhaps a connection to Jolene, who is going to talk after. When our office detects there is activity going on in one neighborhood, we usually try to contact the neighborhood association. So for example, when we had the recent case in the River Road area, Rini contacted the neighborhood association to talk about, we got these reports. And then sometimes the information comes through us, sometimes the neighbors already know and are already engaged. And we also do try to support the neighborhood associations who are doing that kind of work to support their neighbors.
Gary Holinsky, you have a question?
Two, actually. One for Sean is the whole River Road area, the city-county split and calling whomever and whichever, and then the reporting, is it all feedback into one? I assume it does because it's within the city of Eugene, but I don't know. And the other one for Fabio, that 2017 spike, and then the decrease back down to what appears to be normal, it seemed like there was a lot of attention back then on reporting. And I'm just wondering if maybe we need to get back to emphasis on reporting issues. I've always been involved in this, and it just seems like back then it was, I knew which things were going to end up serious and which things weren't, and which were legal, that Sean just mentioned, that they are protected by the First Amendment. I'm just curious about that spike there. But anyway, Sean, the city-county issue.
Yeah, that's a real issue for us in criminal investigations, because if it does come in, we had the graffiti that occurred to the individual's car, horrendous event. That is in the county, and there's some cross collaboration with us and Lane County Sheriff's Office. As a matter of fact, I was talking to their detective sergeant about this, and there's sharing. But if there wasn't awareness of that case, we see this occasionally, unless there's some communication between the two agencies, Lane will have, or yeah, Lane has that case and we have the others that are inside the city. So that is a weakness for us as law enforcement, and quite candidly, coming from another agency, we're not in a common records management system with Lane County, although we're in a common dispatcher. So there is some challenges there for law enforcement that we've identified that in the long term, we'll have some solutions to that, but that's a technological piece that will have to come in subsequent years. But for right now, we have good collaboration with criminal investigations from Lane County. So in that regard, there's some information sharing going on. And Gary, if I might, and not to jump Fabio on this, I was curious about the outliers there in 2017 as well as to why we had that spike in numbers, as I wasn't with the Eugene Police Department at that point. And we don't know from a statistical point of view as to why that occurred. And I'm trying to dig deeper into that. If that was a reporting issue, like very much so, more than seems that was a point of emphasis for the agency at that point. But I'll let Fabio hit that now.
Yes, before answering that question, I will just add something about the case in the River Road area. So for our office, we have different understanding on how to work with the victims. So for the investigation perspective, EPD could not take that case because it was in the county, under county jurisdiction. But for our office, it was different. We did work with the victims because for us, if people are in the UGB, or if they work, or if they study in Eugene, or if they have connections to Eugene, we will serve them. So we still work with the victims, even though EPG could not investigate that case. And sometimes we even help people who live completely very far away from Eugene. We have actually received calls from other states. And although we cannot report their case, we do not include this case in our reporting. We do provide information and help people as we can. For the 2017 spike, we cannot prove the reason. But based on the experience from different cities that had this kind of reporting, it was, we can say that it was connected somehow to the election cycle. So after the 2016 election, many people feel empowered to come out and say hateful things to other people. So there was more activity going on, and there was also more awareness of that, so people were reporting more. So we know there was a connection. We cannot prove how much that spike was influenced by what happened in the election, but we saw the same thing happening at the end of last year. So we saw more reporting happening during the election cycle.
Thank you.
Martha.
I would like to ask Sean for more details about the graffiti incidents in Santa Clara and how that process worked, that those were not classified as bias incidents specifically. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to delineate, they're clearly bias incidents. There's no question about that, or bias events. That's hate speech. But when we go back to, and I'll just take the investigation from the beginning, we're notified that the graffiti has occurred. We immediately assign the detectives who go out and canvass the area. And I don't think I'm giving anything away on this, where we run back in some video and of course identify some suspects, and the detectives do what they do with some good old fashioned gun work, and they identify, some suspects, and they go and interview them. And what I cannot do is talk about the substance of the interview with the kids, but subsequent to interviewing the kids, the bias, the intent that I talked about previously about what we need to prove in a bias crime, and that would be the kids put the graffiti intentionally on the building with the intent to impact one of our protected classes. And that was not there. So criminally, it does not meet, and believe me, I understand how this feels and how it looks. And those living in the neighborhood having to drive past that every day, it's not right, it's terrible. But the criminal burden that's there requires us to meet certain things, and it wasn't there in this case.
Hmm.
So they are still charged with the criminal mischief that's there. They're just not charged with the bias crime. Yeah, Martha, I hope that answers your question. I don't expect that would necessarily sit well with any of you, but unfortunately, that is kind of, the rules of the game that we play by.
Okay, well, frustrating, but now I know more. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Captain, perhaps I'll give one example that can help people understand this situation. We had a case of the N-word appearing in one place. And when that case was investigated, it was done by an African-American student. So it was hurtful to other African-American students who saw that, and it was thought initially as a hate act. But when it was investigated and there was the case, that connection between the criminal intent wasn't there. So it's still the school and the people who were involved in the case had to address the impact that it had in the community of students, but the motivation was something else. And this is why sometimes it's challenging for us to make the determination in these cases, but it doesn't prevent us from being to pay attention on how we communicate that to the community.
Dawn.
I would like to know specifically about the statistics and record keeping aspect of this. That is, I understand that in order for it to be listed as a bias crime, there has to be intent by the perpetrator. But I think I heard Captain Adams say that this then, in the case of the graffiti on at Papa Murphy's and those businesses there, this is still a bias incident.
Mm-hmm.
Does it get reported in the statistics, or do only crimes get reported in the statistics?
So I'll jump at that. Yeah, we still have a bias incident here for sure. And we would document it as a bias incident in the report that we would provide to the state of Oregon. So there is documentation that's clearly, we have, I wouldn't say reams, but we have a pretty lengthy criminal investigation on this, which articulates everything as well. And so we did originally take it as a bias crime. So it was originally classified as a bias crime and received bias routing for us. But statistically and for reporting purposes, it becomes a bias incident.
And then I would, thank you. And I would ask Fabio, if an African-American who writes graffiti using the N-word in graffiti, creating this, contributing to the atmosphere, if you will, the community atmosphere of hate and bias and intimidation, does that get reported as a bias incident? Or because the perpetrator is African-American, it no longer hits the statistics?
For our work at the HRNI, it is victim-centered. So if people felt offended by it and that impacted how people experience the community, then we report it as a bias incident.
Thank you. And I did have one more question, which was referring to slides, your slides, Fabio. I was surprised when you first presented a slide listing hate crimes by protected class. There was a gender identity as one of the classes, but gender wasn't mentioned as a protected class. Maybe it's surprising to me, given how much violence occurs specifically directed against women.
It's based on the reporting, and it varies by year. So for that year there was presenting, we didn't have a case that was classified by gender identity. In 2018, we did have such cases. And for the protected classes, we have federal.
I think there's a misunderstanding. I saw a gender identity, but not gender. It's surprising to me that gender.
It depends on the case that are reported to us.
Okay.
So the data that you saw were the cases reported for the year 2019.
Okay. And
so we did not have the other cases.
And to circle back to this specific incident right now, which I recognize the focus is on race is important in that incident. but the specific hate speech used was gendered. There were 3 words, and one of the 3 is a gendered hate speech. So I'm
Yeah.
curious.
We did not have. Sorry.
I've only heard it talked about as a race incident. And so does it only appear, is that how the gender falls off and becomes invisible because it's not recognized, or?
No, we didn't have a report of that case until you sent that information in an email to us. So all the pictures we had before were about the N words and other symbols. So that only became evident after the fact through our email conversation.
Then maybe this question is for Captain Adams, because the EPD never did. I saw it back there. I don't know if it was invisible to other people, but the police department didn't seem to recognize it as a specifically problematic word, or didn't in any way acknowledge it.
Well, Dawn, if I can understand your questioning here, we're referring to words directed at women, correct?
That would be the B word, yeah.
And so when we look at bias crime, there's specific classifications, race, gender identity being a couple that jump out. But in a bias crime in and of itself, in what we operate in, there is no delineation between men. So we do not have a bias crime that we investigate with either a man or woman as a recognized protected class. And so in that regard, the use of that word, as offensive as it is, we recognize that, absolutely it is. It does not come to a bias crime by definition, by law.
Thank you.
Michael, you're next.
Yeah, okay, I did unmute. Listening to Captain Adams and Mr. Andrade, it sounds like they have a pretty thoroughgoing process, and I wondered if they could just speak briefly about what neighborhood associations might bring to the table that might be missing, or what we could usefully do to engage in that process that might add something, add value, or what might they need from us?
Mike, I would just ask you, forgive me, I would prefer to talk after Jolene explains her experience in the River Road area, and then we can complement, because she is also invited here to talk about the experience.
Okay.
So I just would interject that given the way this is going, I thought we would answer the questions that were specifically about the incident that happened here in River Road, and then we would move to the solutions-oriented part of the program, and Jolene could kick us off with that. And I just wanted to ask Claire then if her question would be more directed toward the solution part or more about, okay, so then go ahead, Claire.
Thanks, Kate. So I just wanted to continue on Dawn's line of questioning because it's concerning to me what I believe we're hearing. So if I am walking down the street in my neighborhood or downtown and another person screams to me that I'm FNB, that is not something that I can report to the Human Rights Office as a bias incident. Is that correct?
That can be reported to our office. We in EPG, we are under different circumstance for reporting. So our reporting at the City of Eugene is voluntary. It's guided by the statements we have received from our City Council, what's in our Human Rights Code, and so on. So we go beyond what's in state law and federal law. So we have more protected classes. We include more in our reporting. So there is a difference here. EPG officers, they would follow the criminal code, and that's where they have to limit their actions to. So that's why the reporting that we see coming from our office every year, the annual hate and bias report, the data that it includes is different from the data that we see report to the FBI, because there are some cases that they would apply only to Eugene because we have more protected classes and we have a different methodology for reporting it.
Okay, so that's very helpful clarification.
So for example, Counselor, in the case that Dawn mentioned in one email, we got information about the B word. We did not have that then. So after we got that information, then it gets included in our reporting.
Okay, thank you very much.
I just wanted to add that it's included in the report, and I think that that's a very good thing, but there's really nothing that can be done about it. For two reasons. First of all, it's considered to be freedom of speech. And also here in Oregon, we have even a broader notion of freedom of speech, which makes it very hard to challenge anybody in terms of acting based on whatever it is that that person might have said. It can be very offensive, but unless there's some sort of a direct threat, there's nothing that really can be done about it other than to report. And I've had that experience when I was the dean of students at the University of Oregon, where officers, police officers, faculty, administrators, other students could have the most horrendous things said to them directly. And unless it was a direct threat, there was nothing that could be done about it. So that's the nature of the First Amendment anyway. But then here in Oregon, we have even a broader notion of the First Amendment, which really makes almost any kind of offensive speech permissible, unless there's a direct threat.
Thanks, Paul. Mary.
So is gender identity as a protected class statewide?
Mary, yes, that was added. That's part of Senate Bill 577 as well, where gender identity was added to the protected classes identified in the bias crime.
So if someone called me, the B word on the street, my gender identity is female, wouldn't that be covered?
No, ma'am. So gender identity, as it's referenced, refers to an individual who does not identify as either male or female. They're non-binary, for example, or any one of the other combinations. So it's not, that's when you hear gender identity, that does not refer to man, woman. That refers to transgender or the equivalent.
Okay.
Mary, let me just add, Captain, also that gender is also a protected class in Oregon. The difference here is that some words in themselves, although they are offensive to people based on their gender, would not classify as a hate crime. That's the challenge that we have with the legislation right now. So there would be freedom, protecting the freedom of speech. But if it was a case of someone denying employment, if someone denying housing or denying acceptance to a public space based on gender, that would be a criminal activity that could be investigated. Or if it becomes a case of harassment, if someone is threatening you when you follow him, then there is a different law that could apply. But just the words used in connection to gender would not classify as a hate crime.
Okay, thanks, Fabio. So I'm going to, there was a request for us to read aloud the diversity and inclusion statement that SCCO adopted, and Dawn has it in front of her. So she's going to go ahead and read that. And then we'd like to hear from Jolene about how ARCO has mobilized and created their own social justice committee. So a little bit about the process for getting that going, and then the way that they reacted to the hate crime in their neighborhood the week before the incident in our neighborhood. So Dawn.
Okay. So last summer, the Santa Clara Community Organization adopted the following diversity and inclusion statement. The Santa Clara community is rich with natural beauty, passionate residents, and a commitment to using our collective diversity as an asset to benefit our present and inform our future. Our community affirms this commitment via this statement in support of diversity and its multiple benefits, those visible, tangible, and otherwise. No person shall be victimized, marginalized, or discriminated against in our community on the basis of race, gender, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, disability, education level, political affiliation, or citizenship status. We support dialogue, discourse, and disagreement in constructive and holistic capacities that further relationships and prosperity for all at the table. We reject hatred, bigotry, and vulgarity in all forms. We support an individual's right to lead his, her, or their lives without influence from perspectives that foster racial, ethnic, or other bias-based outcomes. If you feel you have been the victim of or witnessed any type of discrimination in our community, please report it, and the website is included. And if you aren't sure or have questions about reporting, please contact the Santa Clara Community Hotline, the SCCO BAT phone, and there's a phone number given for confidential assistance, adopted unanimously by a quorum, of the SCCO Executive Board in July. And we also adopted at that same time a statement in response to recent police killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and far too many others. We are stunned and grieving from the traumatic loss of Black American lives as a result of continued systemic racism and recurring police violence. We say the names of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others. We hear the voices of our fellow Americans crying for justice, and we renew our commitment to work every day to overcome the disparities that exist within our community and our society. We recognize that racism does not only reside in individual hearts and minds. The violence and oppression that Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color face are reflected in racial disparities in all areas of society and call for systemic and policy changes in our communities, our workplaces, and our institutions. The Santa Clara Community Organization is committed to cultivating an inclusive community that values and embraces diversity and respects the humanity of all people. This commitment includes educating ourselves on the topics of white privilege, implicit bias, and the systemic historical racism afflicting the United States for centuries. We want our brothers and sisters of color to know that we seek to understand and that we believe knowledge is power. The horrific racism that we still see in the year 2020 is unacceptable. We stand united in our fight for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all. Hate has no home in Santa Clara. Black lives matter, and we stand together.
Thank you, Dawn. So this next up is Jolene Simpson from the River Road Community Organization, or as we like to call it, ARCO.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Thanks for the invitation. It's great to see all of you here. And I just have to say that's the first time I've heard those statements read, and I really appreciate the work that Santa Clara put into those statements and making them public and signing on as a community. I think that's excellent work. So I live in the River Road neighborhood. I've been in this neighborhood for 37 years, and I'm on the Social Justice Committee. I've been involved in neighborhood work for much of that time. And our committee formed kind of late summer, early fall, I think in response to the Black Lives Matter movement across the country, and particularly in the state of Oregon. I think we were moved to do something on a community level. You know, that question of what can we do here at home? How can we apply the things we've learned? What kind of world do we want to see, and how can we manifest that? So there has been a group of maybe 9 to 10 people who have been meeting. We met more frequently at first, and then just once a month. Initially, we felt the need to form a kind of a rapid action team to deal with incidents of bias and hate, because it seems like these things come up and immediately require action. And So we did form a small bias response team. They created some sort of ground rules in terms of coordinating with HRNI, the police department, and also communication amongst themselves. You know, we weren't supplanting those kinds of efforts, but also wanted to have a way to provide information or bear witness, and provide support if neighbors were impacted by bias or hate activities. And so specifically, there was a situation where a neighbor was displaying a Confederate flag inside their house, and kids outside were telling neighbor kids that they didn't belong here. And this was sort of a friend reporting, and it's still kind of a muddle, but it definitely raised questions for us about, what do we do about this? You know, what do you do about this? I mean, some things are really obvious. They hit you in the face, and you know you've got to speak out publicly. And you know, what do you do in your neighborhood to bring people into the conversation about the harms of racism and injustice? So we thought focusing on education and training would be kind of a key element of our committee. And there was an invitation that went out to form a study group to read and reflect on a book called Me and White Supremacy. And that sort of fizzled. There wasn't, people were interested, but nobody wanted to commit to the time. So that was just something that we launched once, and we certainly could launch again. We also participated ourselves in some trainings, like a kind of training called bystander upstander training, which helps people learn how to respond in the moment in a safe sort of way. If you see something happening, what do you do? Just as a way to inform ourselves, we shared resources on training videos, you know, educational webinars, and books that we were reading. So those are just some ideas. It's obviously an ongoing process. And we also did initiate some outreach to the county sheriff about what kind of citizen oversight there is with the sheriff's department in terms of use of violence, community complaints, any records that might be kept specifically on actions taken against people who historically have been targets of injustice, people of color and other groups, other oppressed groups. So we did initiate that conversation. We haven't come to a conclusion about that yet, but it did segue into some outreach to a committee that's looking at the Eugene Police Department and its relationship to the community and funding that's provided through the city of Eugene. So there's an ad hoc committee that's meeting and will issue a report in April. And maybe Fabio, you can speak more specifically to the details of that committee, but it is looking at issues of police reform and kind of shifting funding within the police department or within the community to provide resources that might give us a more appropriate response in certain situations. I think we all have seen how excited other communities are about the cahoots model. So there's just things that we're looking at. We talked to the sheriff's department about bringing a cahoots model of crisis response into the out into Lane County and specifically River Road as a way to free up police resources for things that really involve criminal activity and provide, you know, social work and mental health care for people who need that kind of support. So we are thinking about an educational program at the next River Road meeting to talk specifically about police reform and what does that mean? Why are people calling for that now? What are we looking at locally if we talk about that? What are the issues involved? So again, looking at a way to educate the community and ourselves, of course, and be participants in that conversation. We also have done some outreach to the Latinx community, specifically related to COVID response, issues of getting vaccines, information about where to get testing, information about quarantine resources. So we're sort of in process with that and looking at ways to connect with the schools and churches and businesses as a way to provide sort of lines of communication. And that came out of kind of an understanding that communities of people of color in particular have been especially impacted by COVID and are often frontline workers in different industries and different kinds of activities. So we're just trying to build relationships, I think, and do what we can in terms of education. And just recently, you know, we talked about, what do we do? Do we hold like a 2-day teach-in, which would require a lot of participation and time commitment. But I think at the end of our meeting tonight, we talked about ways to raise issues that are relevant regarding racism and oppression and injustice in many of the things that we talk about as a community group. So certainly policing in the neighborhood is a huge discussion. You know, issues related to housing, not just homelessness, but also housing affordability, you know, issues of zoning and single family housing versus middle housing. So I'm trying to synthesize 6 months of committee work into 5 minutes. But so we're a pretty enthusiastic group and we're just really kind of finding our way. We did organize the rally. I'll end with that. That was a huge, wonderful, kind of joyful event in response to a terrible incident. It was really great to give the community, including us, an avenue for, you know, very publicly stating hate has no home here. You know, we absolutely support the people who were victims of that hate crime. And we're all here, we stand with people who have been targeted. So it was a good, wonderful outpouring, which we organized in. I have to give the committee credit. It was just like a lot of furious emailing and blasting out on social media networks over just a handful of days. So anyway, I'll stop there. We were happy about it though.
Gary Halinsky, your hands up.
Jolene, how did you reach out to the Latinx group? And we probably in our area, we're increasing our Black population a little bit. Our Latinx is probably stabilized, but I'm just curious because when I worked at North Eugene, I just stopped working there about 6 months ago. I talked to a lady down there, Black lady, and she said, and I wanted to invite some of their outstanding Black student union kids to our meeting, and she kind of chuckled at me. She said, "Do you realize how intimidating that would be for a 16 or 17-year-old Black kid to show up to a bunch of white guy people, you know, and you know, you need to come to us." So I'm just curious what your how you've achieved your outreach.
So we're just at the beginning phases of that, but I reached out to Centro Latino Americano, and then I had a Zoom meeting with Maria Aguirre, and we talked. And I just said, we want to help. And these are some of the ideas we have, which included like somehow connecting with the schools in our neighborhood, outreach to businesses and outreach to churches. So basically kind of offering, our helping hands and boots on the ground to go out and see what we could do. So we talked a little bit about strategizing in terms of public health outreach, and also I made some calls to the local schools. And so we're still in process with that, but we want to just be the people who might go out and distribute flyers or emergency public health kits related to COVID protection and quarantine support.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Dawn, you're next.
Thanks. Thanks, Jolene. My question is about the ARCO response to the the event that targeted the one Black family. Did you work with that family to decide what your response would be?
Yeah.
Okay. So the rally that was checked out with them first before.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Harry, you're next.
Yeah, I was going to add that outreach in general is difficult, especially in this period where we're all socially distant. So if anybody on here has ideas for outreach in general or to various minority communities, that is welcomed.
Rini, you're next.
I just wanted to follow up a little bit on Jolene's response. So the River Road Community Organization co-chair Claire Strawn asked if the victims of that incident in River Road were willing to be contacted by the neighborhood association. And so I asked Fabio, because he was working with the family, he asked them. And so we were able to say to River Road that, yes, this family does want to be in touch, and we were able to give contact information. So that's sort of referencing back to what Fabio talked about as the victim-centered practice we have with hate and bias and the rights assistance program. We let them drive it. And so if that family had not been willing, that's where it would have stopped. So just to kind of fill that part in and how our process works.
And Harry, to your question about how to engage with communities, we do offer some recommendations, and we do have a training, our belonging training, which we offered last year 2 sessions for neighborhood association members. Rini is scheduling 2 new sessions for the upcoming weeks. And those include some tips on how to go about connecting with different communities.
Rini.
Just piggybacking, we're also, Jolene mentioned the upstander bystander training. We're talking with the Surge folks about hosting a couple of those for neighborhood association board members. So our office will pay Surge to put those on. We'll schedule them. We'll invite neighborhood boards to attend. So those are other opportunities to, while that's not engagement, the upstander bystander, it is, I think, a great way to look at what's happening in the community and our role in what's happening in the community in supporting people who may be targeted. So the belonging training, don't have the dates in my head. They're in the next 3 weeks. I will send an email out to board members of all neighborhood associations. So we have your email and you'll get one from me.
You're muted. Can't hear you, Kate.
Kate, you're muted.
That's a neat trick, isn't it? I was saying, are there more questions or comments that people want to pose to Jolene, Fabio, or Captain Adams at this time? Do we want, I guess my question is sort of what do we need to do to move forward? Because I felt like for Santa Clara Community Organization, we have this ideation about what our beliefs are, but when it came to an incident and we needed to figure out a coordinated response, it was a bunch of ideas and not a clear path forward for us to move in any one direction. And so that precipitated this meeting, and I'm hoping that we can sort of either create a small group that wants to continue working on like a social justice action committee for SCCO on into the future, or if we need to gather more information at this moment. I mean, Jolene, if you have any sort of specific ideas about how to move forward, that could be really helpful for us. Or maybe Rini and Fabio, you've had other community organizations that have come to you asking for help figuring out how to organize around that.
We do have many organizations in Eugene. One thing that we have learned over the years is that all these organizations, they are struggling. They depend on donations, they depend on volunteers, and sometimes when we go to them just asking for them to engage in our processes, we are creating more problems for them than helping. So sometimes we have to ask them, how can we help you? How can we engage in a way that is beneficial for both groups or both sides? And that's sometimes difficult. But at least in our office, we have been very conscious of this situation when we are engaged with nonprofits and other groups. When we get requests about responding to hate and bias incidents from different neighborhood associations, our recommendation is always talk to the victims. If they are willing to talk, they will let you know what they need. And then we try to organize around that. It is amazing that so many neighborhood associations are having this kind of conversations because it's something new for many. We have had a long history of neighborhood associations due to the connection to land use and protecting the character of the neighborhoods, actually enforcing discrimination. So to have this new moment in which we see neighborhood associations driving the conversation, it is amazing. And we are very excited and hopeful that we'll see a lot of change coming out of this movement. So thanks for all of you for engaging and for dedicating time to this kind of conversation, which are not easy conversations. We do these trainings in our office and we have these conversations and they are difficult and they are challenging for many people. So I was really pleased how fast and how willing you were to engage with those cases. I believe one easy or perhaps the most effective way is to let the people who are motivated about the issues drive the work. So sometimes having board meetings once a month to discuss issue, by the time you have a decision made, it's already too late. So having a committee, having a small group of people who are motivated and interested in engaging, have the time and capacity to do that, that is really beneficial. And usually that's what works the best in terms of any board that has to follow the rules and public meetings, regulations, and so on. So having these committees that have more freedom to act and connect with people faster, I think is a better way.
Okay, Gary, you're next, and then Judy.
And just kind of to agree with Fabio, and I've been putting this in emails forever, is we absolutely need to move quickly on forming a committee. And that'll attract the people that are passionate about this topic. And I just want to give public thanks to Dawn for finally driving home our diversity statement, because that was dragging on for years. It took a couple of years to get that finalized, and Dawn finally put that together for us. And we just can't take that length of time again to do that. We need to form the committee, and I think a key element of it is when an event happens, we need to respond, and we need to respond quickly. And that's the the committee should have something set up that just triggers the reaction, from the Santa Clara community organization, be it to the board plus to the entire group. It just, personally, I'm pretty frustrated. I was disappointed that it took us so long to get to that statement. It's just time to form that committee and move on.
Okay, Judy, then Michael.
Okay, so I wanted to touch on a couple of things. I think that if we're really at this point, we're looking at what we can do as a community and how we want to move forward. It's important that there are these criminal investigations, but whether or not it's determined whether it's criminal or not, it seems like we've been kind of waiting to see, like, well, are they going to say it's criminal? Are they going to tell us if it was bad or not? We don't need that to know that morally it's wrong. In our diversity statement, we say that we're not going to accept any type of bigotry, vulgarity. This was all of those things. There's really no debating whether it was or it wasn't. I don't think that's up for debate. So if we see something like this, there's a criminal investigation that goes on, and that needs to happen. But as a community, we can move forward immediately and say, this is wrong. We're not waiting for whether it's criminal or not. We know that it is wrong, and I don't think that's up for debate, but I think that we all are in agreement that that's the case. I did hear a question about how we can reach out to the Latin community. I haven't seen anything in Spanish. There's nothing on the website that I found that's in Spanish. We don't have any signs saying, hey, come to our monthly meeting. Maybe before, when coming in person, it might have been difficult to have someone there to interpret and do things in Spanish. But these days, a lot of the Latin communities, their children are going to school on Zoom. They've become much more comfortable with having interactions like this. I know that my mom, she does cooking classes over Zoom now. She does all these different things where she didn't in the past because she's more comfortable with these items. So we can put things out there in Spanish. We can have at least a Spanish section on our website. Something in Spanish. Let's reach out to them. Let's say, hey, we want you here. Are you not comfortable? We can make you comfortable. The Latin community, at least myself growing up, it was always keep your head down. Don't get involved with those politics. Don't get involved with different things. We try to live life as quietly as possible to not cause any issues. But there's a different generation, and there's people now that are saying, I need to be involved. I need to have my voice out there and say it. And I myself, I am here and I am documented. There are a lot of people in our community that are undocumented. I heard it said that the Latin community is kind of, stabilized, perhaps to you, but we are sometimes a silent community. We are not always comfortable to say something. We have, if not ourselves undocumented, people in our family that are undocumented. And again, throughout our life, we're told, just look down, don't cause any issues, and don't voice those concerns. So it's really important, if we do truly want to make that community feel welcome, to say, hey, vengan a nuestras juntas que tenemos en el internet. We can tell them things in Spanish where they hear and say, oh, that's my native tongue. Someone took the time to reach out to me, and that's something that we can do. I heard that was asked. That's something we can do. We have not seen anything in Spanish. I personally haven't. I think it would be something great to put out there. And whatever we want to move forward with as a community, I can see that the intent is here. I love this community. I own my home here. I walk this neighborhood every day. I love this community. Let's make it better. It's a beautiful statement that we have. When we found out about this community just shortly ago, though we've been here 4 years, we just found out about this. I went on the website and we found that diversity statement, and I thought, wow, that is beautiful. I am so happy that my community has decided to put that out there. But those words will be just words until we decide to actually take action to support that. And unfortunately, when a situation like this happens, that's exactly the time to put something out there. And it's been some time now that graffiti's out there, and there's still not a statement out there. So we do need to move quickly with those items to not wait for someone to tell us that it's wrong. We know it's wrong, and we need to go ahead and move forward as such. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. Michael Neiman, you're next.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as one of the people that engaged in trying to have a response to the graffiti in the Santa Clara area after dawn alerted, some of us to it. A couple of comments. Fabio said that the idea of having a committee or a smaller subgroup of the board that can respond more quickly to these things seems like a very good idea, but it's more than that. The committee needs to be empowered to act and to have a very clear decision-making structure, like whether it's consensus or, it needs to be very clearly spelled out, I think, what the decision-making structure is for the committee, but it also needs to be empowered and know that, there won't be second guessing after the fact by other members of the board. It seems to me that needs to be stated in the actual creation of the committee.
Thanks, Michael. Let's see, I'm going to ask Dawn, would you be willing to collect, if people want to sign up to be on such a committee, are you willing to collect names and emails so we can start to coalesce that and then we can move on to our next item on our agenda? Jolene, yeah.
Well, I just wanted to add that I know our social justice committee would be delighted to collaborate with you all. And there's a lot to talk about. And it's a pretty messy process, I have to say, over the last 6 months, just trying to figure this out. And there is a need for that kind of rapid response, as well as just this ongoing need for education and, raising the issues and not being quiet about it. So there's just a lot of work to do, really, but it's super exciting that you all are so enthusiastic, and I really look forward to working with you all. So yeah, so thank you.
So for anybody who doesn't really understand Zoom yet, Dawn just said if you want to be on that subcommittee, you can private chat her, which means go to the bottom of your screen and where it says chat, you click on that and it lets you over to the right of your screen direct a message. So you put where it says to, you put in Dawn Leslie, and then you can type your message and hit return or enter, and it will go directly to Dawn and not to everybody else. So you can send her your contact information and we can go from there. So at this point, I guess I would like to make sure we give a great big thank you to Fabio, Captain Adams, and Jolene. And then